In June of 1981, the tragic fate of 14-year-old Marian Crofts unfolded in Aldershot, England, where she was brutally raped and murdered. This heart-wrenching case is marked by a staggering 21-year delay in justice, culminating in the conviction of former soldier Tony Jasinskij, who was found guilty thanks to advancements in DNA technology and subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. Marian, the cherished youngest daughter of Trevor and Anne Crofts, set out on Saturday, June 6, 1981, to cycle the 4 miles from her residence at Basingbourne Close in Fleet, Hampshire, to attend a clarinet lesson at the Wavell School in Farnborough. Typically, her father would drive her, but on this particular day, he was engaged in a cricket match. Her journey took her along Laffans Road in Aldershot, adjacent to the serene Basingstoke Canal. Between 9:30 and 10 a.m., she fell victim to a vicious attack, rendered unconscious by severe blows that left her with extensive bruising and a brain hemorrhage. Dragged into the nearby wooded area, she was subjected to a horrific assault before being murdered. The perpetrator left behind DNA evidence on her body, her jeans, and a sock, which would later prove crucial. Her lifeless form was concealed in the underbrush, discovered later that day by a police dog handler, while her clarinet case was discarded into the Basingstoke Canal, later recovered. Tony Jasinskij, a lance corporal in the Army Catering Corps stationed in Aldershot, resided with his pregnant wife, Lynn Gowans, in Army quarters just a mile and a half from the crime scene. He was one of many men interrogated regarding their whereabouts during the time of the murder. In a strategic move, DNA evidence was intentionally withheld, anticipating future advancements in testing that would eventually lead to a match. Meanwhile, the DNA samples collected from Marian's body and clothing were meticulously preserved to prevent contamination and were thoroughly documented. The case was later featured in a reconstruction on BBC One's Crime Watch on February 22, 2000, highlighting the tragic events that transpired on that fateful stretch of Laffans Road in Aldershot. The murder case remained unsolved until 1999, when a DNA profile was successfully extracted from previously withheld evidence using the innovative low copy number (LCN) testing method. This profile was meticulously compared against the UK National DNA Database over the following 2 years, ultimately leading to a match with Tony Jasinskij. At that time, he had transitioned from his service in the Army Catering Corps to a role as a security guard in Leicester, residing on Kegworth Avenue with his second wife, Michelle, after his divorce from his first wife in 1984. Following his arrest for domestic assault, a routine DNA sample was collected and entered into the database. In April 2001, upon discovering the match, Jasinskij was apprehended and charged with the rape and murder of Marian Crofts, a crime committed in 1981, which he vehemently denied. During his trial at Winchester Crown Court, forensic experts confirmed the presence of Crofts' DNA in the samples taken from her body and clothing. The jury was informed that the probability of a DNA match to Jasinskij was an astonishing 1 in a billion. After 4 weeks of proceedings, the jury deliberated for a mere 3 hours before rendering a guilty verdict on both counts. He received a life sentence for the murder and an additional 10 years for the rape to be served concurrently. In his sentencing, Judge Michael Broderick characterized Jasinskij's actions as a cruel and callous murder, emphasizing the 21 years of anguish endured by Crofts' family as they contemplated the horrific final moments of her life. In 2014, Jasinskij sought to overturn his life sentence, presenting his case before Lady Justice McClure QC, Lord Justice Phillips, and Judge Neil Ford QC at the Court of Appeal in London. He contended that the DNA evidence presented during his 2002 trial was fundamentally flawed, as it included material from the victim that suggested the murderer had a chromosomal disorder. thereby asserting his wrongful conviction. The esteemed appeal judge, Lord Justice Phillips, articulated that the initial verdict was entirely safe, categorically dismissing Yashinsky's assertions as fanciful. He emphasized that Yashinsky's fixation on an anomaly could not possibly eclipse the staggering 1 in a billion likelihood that he was responsible for the heinous acts of rape and murder. In a notable development in April 2022, the parole board announced that they would be reviewing his case for potential release, indicating that he might be granted freedom within a matter of weeks. A chilling cold case from 1959 involving the mysterious disappearance of a 7-year-old boy was resolved last week through the advancements of DNA technology, many years after the charges against his adoptive parents were dismissed due to insufficient physical evidence. On October 4, 1959, a human skeleton was unearthed along a roadside in Mequon, Wisconsin, which investigators later identified as the remains of a child aged between 6 and 8 years. Concurrently, while Mequon police pursued leads regarding the skull, deputies in Houghton County, Michigan, were investigating the case of an adopted child named Marku Jutila, whose parents had fled to Chicago. Concerns regarding the child's safety arose among relatives of William and Hilja Jutila after the couple moved from Michigan to Chicago. This prompted the Houghton County Sheriff's Office to collaborate with the Chicago Police Department. As reported by the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office in Wisconsin, the Jutilas were interrogated in Chicago, where they confessed to discarding their adoptive son's body in a ditch in Mequon. The mother, Hilja Jutila, admitted to having physically assaulted her son to the point of death, according to the sheriff's office. Unfortunately, the original case files were not accessible to investigators, leaving the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office to rely heavily on newspaper articles and limited court documents for information. On March 28, 1966, the Jutilas faced charges in Chicago and were subsequently extradited to Michigan. During psychological evaluations, they claimed that their adopted son had been ill for several days before they discovered him lifeless in his bedroom. They expressed fear over the circumstances and made the fateful decision to leave their home for Chicago, abandoning Marku by the roadside during their escape. The skull discovered in Mequon bore characteristics reminiscent of Marku Jutila. However, the allegations against the Jutilas were ultimately dismissed due to the prosecution's inability to establish corpus delicti, the legal doctrine necessitating substantial evidence of a crime, such as a body, before any prosecution can proceed. As the prosecutors could not definitively link the skeletal remains to Marku, the charges were abandoned. The case remained inactive until 2023, when agents from Wisconsin's Justice Department collaborated with the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory to identify the remains. It was resolved that investigators would endeavor to identify the individual through DNA extracted from the skull and by employing investigative genealogy, stated the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office. A DNA profile was successfully generated in May. However, it did not correspond with any profiles in the National Combined DNA Index System, known as CODIS. Nevertheless, additional skeletal remains held by the University of Wisconsin were found to correspond with the skull, providing further evidence. Subsequent examinations of these remains indicated that the individual likely endured considerable neglect, as evidenced by their dental health and new bone formation resulting from infection, trauma, to the periosteum, or bleeding, the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office reported. Investigators were able to reconstruct parts of the case with assistance from Michigan State Police, who uncovered Marku's adoption records. Born Chester Alfred Briney in 1952, he resided in Goodwill Farm, an orphanage that has since undergone a name change. It is presumed he was given the name Marku upon his adoption. During the genealogy investigation, the DNA profile obtained from the remains revealed multiple matches to family members of the Briney family, according to the sheriff's office. His birth mother, Josephine Briney, passed away in 2001, while both of his adoptive parents, William and Hilya Jutila, died in 1988. Authorities have decided to conduct a funeral for Chester in Port Washington, Wisconsin. He will find his final resting place at St. Mary's Parish Cemetery, nestled near the serene shores of Lake Michigan. The Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office remarked, "While no one will face prosecution for the untimely demise of Chester Alfred Briney, he may now embrace eternal peace as the truth surrounding his passing has been unveiled. It is a tragedy that no child should depart this world in the manner that Chester did." On November 23, 2008, hunters stumbled upon the frozen remains of a young woman in a creek located in Fond du Lac County, Wisconsin, near an abandoned farmstead. The recovery of her body necessitated the chiseling away of ice, while scuba divers meticulously searched the creek bed for any potential evidence. Among the items discovered were articles of clothing, including a strapless black and pink top from the Zoe Beth brand, adorned with a pink bow, which had been sold at Family Dollar during the spring of 2008. Additionally, her undergarments, also sourced from Family Dollar, were available only between July 1st and July 15th of that same year. Notably, the legs of her Angels brand jeans had been rolled up multiple times, and an elastic ponytail holder was found on her wrist. Curiously, no socks or shoes were present at the scene. Initially, no jewelry was detected until divers uncovered a penny-sized St. Benedict medal, the ownership of which remains uncertain due to the possibility of it having been in the water for an extended period. Some reports, however, indicate that a bracelet adorned with several pendants was also located with her remains. Her hair, a shoulder-length light brown, exhibited varying shades, likely a result of highlighting. The differing sizes of her clothing complicated the determination of her physique, yet it was estimated that she weighed approximately 120 pounds. The cause of death remained inconclusive, as the severe decomposition of the body obscured any signs of potential violence. Nevertheless, authorities leaned towards homicide as the manner of death, dismissing suicide as a possibility, particularly given the suspicious nature of the location where the remains were discovered. Toxicology tests were performed to ascertain the presence of drugs or alcohol in her system, but the results were never disclosed. Although her body was found in the autumn, it was established that she had died during the summer, approximately 2 to 4 months prior, based on the examination of insect traces found on her remains. The individual in question exhibited an overbite, accompanied by dental fillings and sealants on the upper molars, yet no active cavities were present. While the overbite was not classified as severe, it may have been a discernible trait, potentially serving as a distinctive element in her facial reconstruction. Her estimated height ranged from 4 feet 10 inches to 5 feet 4 inches, placing her age between 15 and 21 years, with a weight fluctuating between 110 and 135 pounds, characterized by an average frame. Experts suggest she may have been of Caucasian or Hispanic descent, although the possibility of her being Native American or Asian remains plausible. There is also a chance she was of mixed heritage. Additional physical attributes included a healed rib fracture and a tendency to be pigeon-toed or knock-kneed, which could have been apparent in her gait due to her inward slanting feet. Furthermore, she had spina bifida occulta, a condition she may not have been aware of. To gather DNA information, her femur was sent to the University of Texas. Her DNA was subsequently entered into the National DNA Database, and dental records were established for comparison with those of reported missing persons. Over 200 leads have been pursued in the quest to identify her. A computer-generated reconstruction was crafted from the skull by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, utilizing mortuary photographs and a CT scan of the skull submitted to the center. This reconstruction yielded more than 200 tips, yet none provided definitive leads, as the composite bore a resemblance to numerous missing individuals. Notably, former missing person Amanda Berry, one of the potential identities for Jane Doe, was excluded through DNA analysis. She was found alive in 2013. In addition to Amanda Berry, 2 other individuals who were eventually located were also ruled out. Connie McAllister, who was abducted at the age of 16 and taken to Mexico, and Briney Pert. In a remarkable turn of events, she was ultimately found alive after crossing paths with a church missionary, who promptly relayed the information to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Briney Pert vanished in July 2008 from Elkton, Maryland, and her remains were discovered and identified in December 2011, though the cause of her death remains undisclosed. The unidentified Jane Doe was laid to rest in 2011 after the investigation grew cold. Notable television programs, including America's Most Wanted, aired segments on the case in hopes of uncovering new leads. Additionally, a dedicated Facebook page was established to solicit information regarding her disappearance. On April 23, 2018, authorities unveiled a revised reconstruction and announced plans to exhume the victim for isotope testing and DNA phenotyping, aiming to ascertain the geographical areas she may have inhabited and to refine the understanding of her ethnicity and physical traits. The innovative technique of genetic genealogy, which played a pivotal role in identifying a suspect in the Golden State Killer case, was also employed to trace biological relatives of the victim. In August 2018, the findings from an isotopic analysis conducted by Utah's Isoforensics Laboratory were disclosed, suggesting that Jane Doe likely spent the majority of her life in the southwestern United States, potentially in Arizona or New Mexico. It was indicated that she had resided in the Midwest, possibly in southwestern Wisconsin, northern Iowa, or southern Minnesota, for less than a year before her untimely demise. Investigators initially speculated a connection to the infamous West Mesa murders, although this theory was later dismissed. Biological samples were forwarded to Estrella Forensics in Santa Cruz, California, where a DNA profile was successfully created for investigative genetic genealogy purposes. On November 28, 2021, precisely 13 years after the discovery of her remains, it was announced that Yuri had been positively identified through genetic genealogy efforts led by Barbara Ray Venter. This identification was corroborated by comparing DNA from her mother and sister alongside dental X-rays. Authorities have revealed that Yuri fell prey to the harrowing crime of sex trafficking, tragically passing away at the tender age of 18 in 2008. Investigations uncovered that in the weeks leading up to her untimely demise, she had been present in Milwaukee, Chicago, and Beloit. During a conversation with Yuri's mother, detectives discovered that she had reached out to her in northern Illinois that same year, seeking a ride home from Beloit. Regrettably, her mother was unable to fulfill this request at that moment. After that call, Yuri vanished from her family's lives, never to be heard from again. In April of 1993, the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were unearthed by children in Greenwood, Indiana, a charming locale situated just south of the bustling capital, Indianapolis. This poignant discovery occurred in a field adjacent to Interstate 65, now part of the esteemed Otte Golf Course. The Greenwood Police Department promptly arrived at the scene, and the remains were subsequently transported to the University of North Texas for meticulous examination. Experts determined that the remains belonged to a male, aged between 14 and 30, with a stature ranging from 4 feet 10 inches to 5 feet 4 inches. Fast forward to May 2008, when the particulars of this enigmatic case were catalogued in the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NAMUS, under the designation UP1828. Despite the diligent efforts of law enforcement to uncover the identity of the man, no viable leads emerged, and the investigation grew cold. In a collaborative effort, the Johnson County Coroner's Office, alongside the Greenwood Police Department, the University of Indiana, and the Indiana State Police, sought the expertise of Othram to explore the potential of advanced DNA testing for identification. In 2023, forensic evidence was submitted to Othram's state-of-the-art laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas. The skilled scientists at Othram successfully extracted DNA from the evidence and employed forensic-grade genome sequencing to construct a detailed DNA profile of the unidentified man. The costs associated with Othram's casework were graciously covered by AudioChuck. Following this, Othram's dedicated forensic genetic genealogy team utilized the profile to conduct extensive genealogical research, yielding fresh investigative leads for law enforcement. Armed with this newfound information, investigators embarked on a follow-up inquiry that led them to potential relatives of the deceased. Reference DNA samples were obtained from a possible relative and meticulously compared to the DNA profile of the unidentified man. This thorough investigation culminated in the identification of the individual, who has now been revealed to be Michael Benjamin Davis. Born in Richland County, South Carolina, on December 16, 1965, Davis was in the prime of his life, just in his mid-20s, at the time of his untimely passing. Michael Vaughan, representing Othram, a pioneering company that employs an innovative DNA system, is dedicated to assisting law enforcement in unraveling cold cases. We analyze hundreds of thousands of DNA markers to construct these exceptionally detailed profiles, which can be utilized in various investigative tools. When executed correctly, these profiles allow us to uncover distant familial connections within databases, enabling us to trace back to the direct lineage from which the DNA originated. This methodology was applied in Michael's case, Vaughan elaborated. Vaughan noted that Othram meticulously compared Davis's DNA against samples from multiple public databases, including 23andMe. Following the identification of Davis's remains, Derek Wilson, Chief Deputy Coroner of Johnson County, Indiana, along with Assistant Deputy Coroner Valerie Castro, reached out to Davis's surviving family members. "It's the call we have long anticipated. We found ourselves pondering the identity of this individual. Who was he? What was his life like? We had to immerse ourselves in his experiences, envisioning life as it was in 1993, Wilson reflected. Lori Pineda journeyed from Florence to Greenwood, Indiana, to retrieve her cousin's remains. While we may never fully comprehend the circumstances of Michael's final days or the events leading to his passing, we now have confirmation of his identity, allowing our family to find peace. The uncertainty and worry have dissipated, and for that, we are profoundly thankful to everyone involved," Pineda expressed.